Welcome. It's Tuesday, the 19th of April, and this is a pre-recording of episode 1 of Meet the Candidates, election 2022. And my guest tonight is the candidate for Leichhardt, Dan Hannagan, and the candidate for Kennedy, Peter Campion. Both these gentlemen are candidates for the United Australia Party. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome. Oh, thanks, Bill.
G'day, Bill.
If we could just start off with each of you in turn, I'll start with Peter and then go to Dan. If you could just give us a bit of an introduction about yourself, your past experience in regards to the political sphere, and why you've gone into this election, and why you chose the Australian United Party.
Yeah, no worries, Bill. I was raised in Cairns, went to school in Cairns, moved up to the Tablelands, believe it or not, when Cairns got too big, and that was a couple of 100,000 people ago, and have lived up here in Tolga for just on 31 years, or 32 years at the moment. 1990 we came up. So 3 of our kids were actually born in Cairns. My wife and I were mates from high school, but got together a couple of years later. 3 of them were born down there, and the other 2 were born up here. I was a fireman, or actually my first career was as a DSS fraud investigator at the DSS in Cairns in the 80s and 90s. But then I was a fireman in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and had to take an early retirement with a collection of injuries, and was just happily pottering around in my little acreage, enjoying life as a superannuated retiree, right up until the point where our governments, state and federal, decided to kick our constitution and our laws to the curb and embark on their own little mission, which was seemingly in line with what certain foreign powers wanted, specifically, and I'll name them straight up front, the World Economic Forum and the World Health Authority, World Health Organization rather, neither of whom Australians have voted for. So I actually ran as an independent in Hill, my local state election in 2020, and it was a last minute bid. It was a one-man show. I wasn't particularly well funded. I still got more votes per dollar than the Greens did, which was nice. I would have liked to have beaten the Greens, but it was a bit of a late start. And subsequently, things just got worse and worse with our governments. I beat my famous son-in-law around the ears on numerous occasions. For those that aren't up to speed on that, I'm actually Barnaby Joyce's father-in-law. And finally, I was casting around for a party that I might be able to join and support. I didn't necessarily feel that I'd be the ideal candidate. I'm just about to turn 60, and I'm a bit slow these days with the accumulated injuries that I've had in the past. But I found that the United Australia Party was the best fit, and I joined and put my hand up and said, "I will do whatever jobs you need doing." And they said, "Well, you can be the candidate for Kennedy." And so here we are, and I haven't regretted it. And so far, it's been a lot of fun.
Okay, over to you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So for me, this is my first run at anything political. I've been involved in a lot of community groups and volunteer groups over the years, and done a lot of complaining about politicians and political parties. And that was probably the catalyst, because I spent, I guess in my 20s, I didn't really complain about too much because I was in my 20s. I was out having fun and doing what young people do. And then in my 30s, I started having kids, really got into serious business. I was running the family's company, and started to think a lot further down the line rather than just, like those early 20s type thoughts. And when everything kind of went skew-iff a couple of years ago, I found myself sitting at home, particularly last year, complaining a lot about the lack of representation for the people. I have a very strong core belief that says there's always at least 2 sides to every argument. And the way the government was portraying everything to do with lockdowns and mandates, there was only one side to the discussion. And anytime other opinions came up, they were quickly cast to the side or removed from social media and stuff like that. And it's not about whether I agree with it or not. It was just one of those scenarios where I thought, this doesn't make sense. You can't have a democratic society, a democratic government, and not have a way for people to express their thoughts and opinions. And if the media is telling one story and social media is stopping other people from telling their story, then it doesn't make sense to me. And I thought, well, this isn't a good thing. And then as time progressed on, I saw different mandates and different rules within companies start to affect people in my family more and more. And I found myself complaining about it and listening to complaints, and thought, all right, enough's enough. If this was any other area in life, I wouldn't just sit around and complain about it. I'd do something about it. So the opportunity came up to apply with United Australia Party. Now, obviously, there's other parties. I felt even if I did like Labor, they would not allow you to have a viewpoint outside of the party's line. We all know that. The Liberals, well, you can kind of do it, but they're going to ostracize you. And I thought that's ridiculous. And I feel like the duopoly, the two main parties, is half the problem, because they don't really oppose each other like polarity. They're very, very similar. And that's not a good thing, I don't believe. So I couldn't have been two of the major parties. I wouldn't have been interested in running with those. The door was open with UAP, and it was because of what Craig Kelly did. When no one else was stepping up in Parliament, he got up and he started making noise and presenting alternate viewpoints of what's going on. And again, whether people agree on it or not, it doesn't matter. They need to have different opinions there. It's very important that we always have different opinions. Otherwise, it's just a tyrannical dictatorship. And I don't want to live in a place like that. So, you know, later on, we saw Hanson and Catter and all those guys start to come out and show more support for it. But initially, it was Craig Kelly and the United Australia Party, and they put the call out. So I became a member, and then I applied to be a candidate. And then I supplied the audition video and did the phone interviews and all that kind of stuff. And then I got the phone call that I'd won pre-selection, and the rest is history.
Okay, then. Yes, COVID's been the big issue for the last couple of years, but politics is so much more than one issue.
Yes.
And the other big issue is the differentiation between the federal government's responsibility and the state. And I think there's a case now to be made that the line's been so blurred that people don't know what they're voting for when they go to a federal election. They think they're voting for, I want a toilet block at my sports ground, so I'm going to pressure the parties to give us a couple of $100,000 for this, and then a business in the area says, I want a $3 million grant for a jetty out to be anchored out on the Great Barrier Reef, and they lobby the federal government to that. But that's not really the responsibility of the federal government. The federal government's prime roles are defence, immigration, trade, and a very few other narrow items. But also, one of the biggest problems is, of course, the federal government is the biggest collector of revenue at the moment, because since they took the income tax provisions that the states had over in World War II, when to save the nation, it was a good idea if the states handed over income tax authority to the Commonwealth. And unfortunately, the states left it a bit too long, and now it's, even though there was a High Court case in the 50s, they never got it back. And the biggest problem is the Commonwealth really has the biggest bucket of money, and so everyone appeals to the Commonwealth, even though they're appealing for things that's not really the Commonwealth's responsibility. Just each of you in turn, starting with Peter, do you think we need to go back and sort of start bringing the Constitution to the fore and start highlighting what the responsibilities for each Parliament?
Very much so, Bill. As you know, Section 51 of the Constitution outlines what the federal government's areas of responsibility are. And as you touched on, during the pandemic, that was just ignored. The states closed borders when they specifically don't have that function. Quarantine is a Section 51 responsibility belonging to the federal government. If they wanted to close them for any reason, it would have been illegal, because there's actually two sections of the Constitution outside of 51, specifically 92 and 117, that say that intercourse shall not be limited between the states, and additionally that a person resident in one state should not be disadvantaged in another state. So when the borders were closed on the basis that you can't come across this border because your car's got New South Wales registration, that was completely unconstitutional. The federal government could have done it under 51.10, I think it is, or 51.9. I could look it up. And they could have said, look, there's a disease. Before you can cross this border, you've got to have a medical test, a temperature check, for example. That would have been legitimate. But as any federal politician will tell you, they particularly like having their hands on the income tax takings from the population of Australia. And they will think nothing of getting involved in areas that a normal, rational person would assume would be a corporate responsibility, say in the case of a mobile phone tower, or maybe a local government responsibility in terms of potholes in a country road leading out to a farm. But the federal government will win votes, will actually bribe people to vote for them using other people's money by saying, yes, we will get you a small community grant and we will direct that money to the relevant company in the case of a phone tower, or to the relevant local government or state government to facilitate whatever it is. So you touched on a toilet block at a sports ground. It might well be a state government owned block of land and they've got a lease on it, but the infrastructure there needs to be constructed by the state government. But as federal politicians will tell you, all the money comes initially from the federal government, and that's how they get themselves back into power. So I very much agree with what you said, Bill, that we need to get back to states having their individual powers. We need competition between the states, and moreover, we've got to eliminate collusion between the states in terms of things like the COAG and more recently the utterly un-Westminsterly National Cabinet. Because if you had, say, Woolworths, Coles and IGA sitting down for a meeting to set prices and determine direction over the next 12 months and decide what products would be pushed and what would be suppressed, that would be in breach of Section 42, I think it is, of the Trade Practices Act. So how come governments can get away with it? We need a proper federation of states requires competition between states, so that if you have a particularly repressive state, say like Victoria has been under Dan Andrews, then people can vote with their feet and they can move to a state that's less repressive, that has more respect for their rights, a more efficient infrastructure.
Ding, ding, ding.
Sorry, mate. That's one of my pet subjects, you might have noticed.
Time for Dan.
I'll keep my answer a bit short because Peter's hit every nail on the head there. So look, Bill, 100% agree that the lines are extremely blurred. And look, we could trace that back to education, because I didn't learn very little about politics in school. And I think understanding what the laws, rights, roles, responsibilities, all those types of things are of the citizens and the politicians is something that's really important. My wife's actually born in the States, and I have long conversations with her father, who's American, and everyone who grows up in the States learns about their civil rights. They learn about the Constitution. I think we should do that in Australia. And I think when it comes down to the lines between local council, state and federal, people should really get a good grasp of that. And Peter nailed it in the head. I've read the propaganda pamphlets from the other parties, from the Labor and Liberal, about what they've done and what they intend to do and all that. And a lot of it's state issues. I have people send me emails all the time about, what are you going to do about crime? What are you going to do about education? What are you going to do about this or that? And it's like, well, actually, they're all state matters. And the issue is that, as you so well articulated, the money goes to the federal government. So if we look at education as an example, from what I understand, around 30% of the funds for a state school is state derived, and the other 70% comes from the federal government. So if the federal government's holding the purse strings and everything, while they say they don't have a say in it, they kind of do, because they're the ones holding the purse strings. So I think it all needs a good shake up from top to bottom. There's no doubt about that. there's too many areas that have just kind of moved along with the times and changed and unconstitutionally. There's plenty of examples of that, and it's quite frustrating, because the more I get into this role and the more I learn about how things were and how things have become, it just shows you, how different people in power take advantage of that situation. And as Peter said, once you've got the hand on that purse strings and you have the control of the funds, very hard to get people to relinquish that, because they're used to having that power and that control. So look, top to bottom, politicians, bureaucrats, the whole thing needs a good shake-up, and that's why I'm in it.
I think one of the other things too is what has happened, the Commonwealth with its big buckets of money have basically coerced the states to surrender some of their authority and responsibility to the Commonwealth, not officially, but by just semi-agreements like NatPlan and things like that. And it's made the state governments very, very lazy, because all they have to do is sort of, well, if it doesn't work, we'll just ask the Commonwealth for more money. So I think that's like our education system. The outcomes are getting worse and worse as time goes by. But it's the remedy is for the states to ask for more money. And I think that's an issue, is one of the issues we probably need to address further on. But if we could just move along now, I'd like to look at a couple of policies of the Australian United Party and just seek your comments on them. I'll just chuck up the screen for the first one. This policy is a maximum of 3% interest on home lands to save Australian home ownership. Basically, it's guaranteeing a home loan rate of 3% for the next 5 years. Can you give us a bit of your feeling on that one, Peter, and what's its intent of that policy?
Well, we've got inflationary pressures, Bill, as you're aware, and this is an internationally coordinated scheme. By the same people that stole the 2020 US election, by the same people that occupy the seats at the Davos gatherings, that run organisations like the World Economic Forum. They want to reduce, to put it as nicely as possible, reduce the competitiveness of Western economies, if not outright crash them. And this is why we're seeing all the pressures that we're seeing on our economy that were brought in under the guise of COVID. And what we're going to see is, particularly with this vast debt, this approaching $1.4 trillion, million dollars of debt that the ALP and the LNP have managed to get with almost nothing to show for it, that there's going to be upward pressure on interest rates. So interest rates, Deutsche Bank and the American Reserve Bank have both said they're looking at three rate rises this year. So at 4%, about 60%, as it says in the policy, about 60% of Australians will default on their mortgages. And guess who's going to buy those homes? There's going to be foreign investors, Bill. And at 6%, there's about 80% of Australians who are going to lose their homes. And just as the World Economic Forum said, we'll own nothing and we'll be happy and we'll be renting our homes or leasing them back from some foreign multinational or from some global government, which is what the ultimate plan is. So in the short term, before we can get this debt cleared, which obviously will take 20 years under our plan, 150 years under the Liberals' plan and 180 years under Labor's plan, we've got to save Australians' homes. So this, I think, is probably the key plank that makes us an attractive party for the ordinary man or woman in the street to vote for. And there is only one or the other, man or woman. There's not 56 different sexes, as much as some of the insane left might try to argue. So if we want to keep people in their own homes, we have to put a cap on those mortgages. Now, that's just mortgage interest income is just one of several income streams that banks have. We don't owe the banks any favour. They make vast profits. That's why they report them 6 monthly, Bill. because they're so obscene that if they reported them annually, people would fall out of their shoes with shock, the size of these profit figures. So they can well and truly afford it.
Ding, ding.
And we can legislate to make that happen.
Yeah.
I won't ask you the same question, Dan. I'll move on to another policy.
Actually, Bill, if I could just add two last little bits to that. One of the things that people say, oh, you can't just cap, all interest rates and loans. It's only for principal place of residence for home loans, no other loans. So that's the key thing. And the other thing is only for 5 years. So it's not in perpetuity. They're really key points on that.
The other thing is we have done it before. If you go back to the Keating era, how mortgage rates got up, or interest rates got up to about 17–18%. And basically we were subsidising just about every other home loan in the country. So it's been done before. My reservation in regards to these sorts of plans is every time the economy goes into a bit of spiel, there's always pumping up of the housing market, and we've never had a proper correction. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. If we have a Asian crisis, a GFC or something else, the government moves in, gives more money to first homeowners. They never get any benefit because the price of material goes up, price of labour goes up, and by the end of the day, I remember the GFC one that Rudd brought in. I think they were giving people in the regions about $60,000 in grants. The trouble is, at the end of 12 months, most people were paying $80,000 more for the same house if they had had it under contract a year before. So it keeps the heat in the market, and it's something we probably need to look at and make sure we can take the heat out of the market. I'll bring up the next policy.
Just quickly on that would be correct if it was for all property loans, but it's not. It's only for your principal place of residence. So it's in investment loans, for example, are still going to rise.
Yeah.
So that will have a moderating effect on that you're talking about there.
Well, those loans were always only for the first home buyers, but all I'm saying is that even though they put the first homeowners grant up from originally around about 15,000 and pumped it all the way up to 60,000 with the states putting in money, it actually never delivered cheaper houses or provided $1 of benefit to the actual homeowners.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean, Bill, because we saw that again happen at the beginning of COVID. They had a $25,000 stimulation. Things went crazy. I've been waiting 2 more years to get my house built. The cost of materials have gone through the roof, can't get a tradesman, all that kind of stuff. So this isn't to try and stimulate people to go out there. It's as the rates go up, it's to keep people in their own home. We don't want to see more demand put on the market. We just want to make sure that people don't lose their homes.
Yep. Okay, I'll just put up the screen again. Okay, repaying our national debt with our resources. If Dan wants to take this one.
Certainly. I love this policy. It's actually one of my favourites and something I wholeheartedly agree with. I think that if we're going to send raw materials overseas and not add value to them in Australia, then we should get a benefit as a country, and putting a export license on that, I think is a great idea. I'd love to see it go on just about everything. There's 2 things about this. One is adding the 15% export license onto iron ore actually encourages people or companies to process that iron ore here. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that what other mechanism are we going to put in place to pay back the $1 trillion in debt? That's a hell of a lot of money that's being spent. And as people have said to me, economies go into debt all the time. And yes, they do, but they usually spend their money on infrastructure and building hospitals and roads and education facilities and things like that, not just spend it. So we've spent $1 trillion or plus, and we don't really have anything that's going to make us any money or have a return from that in the future. So, we need to get that income back from somewhere. So I think this is a pretty smart plan. And also, as I said, the secondary gain is if we're going to process minerals in Australia, and not send them overseas, it gives us a commercial opportunity to do that rather than just, sending them overseas. And for people who are environmentally minded, this is a really, really good thing to do, because if we're taking a whole bunch of iron ore, which a good chunk of it's dirt anyway, so we're loading it up, we're sending it overseas to China or Japan, it all gets processed, and then we buy back the materials, and it has to come all the way back on the ship versus processing it here. The other thing is, when it comes to environmental controls and making sure emissions to air, land, and water are all of a high quality of nature, we can't regulate that if it happens in China or Japan. We don't have any say of it at all. So for people who are environmentally conscious, this is a fantastic thing to do, because it completely reduces any of the emission argument on these products, because you're skipping 2 trips.
I suppose then I think the reindustrialisation of Australia is critical, and it's really been shown up with the COVID, with the supply chain problems, and now with the Ukrainian war, and also the push against fossil fuels has left Australia extremely exposed. In regards to your plan there, Dan, do you think one of the projects the Australian United Party should be getting fully behind, and without any hesitation, is Project Iron Boomerang, which it's been on the board for a while? It's designed to bring iron ore across from the west coast to the east coast, and send coal from the east coast to the west coast, have plants on both sides of the country, build power stations and refine that metal, and then ship off steel rather than iron ore.
Yeah, I don't remember who first came up with the idea. I know Clive was talking about it years ago. That just makes sense straight off the bat. That's it. I don't understand when good ideas don't come to fruition. There's a hell of a lot of merit in that, and it's odd. This is one of those things I look forward to learning about, the bureaucratic process and how things seem to not happen. It drives me nuts in my own personal business over the years is the red tape. But this is a fantastic idea, because we've got resources on both sides of the country. If we could just swap them over and process them instead of sending them off to the other countries.
I think it goes back to Lang Hancock. Lang Hancock and J. Bjelke Peterson used to talk about it.
It's old. I don't know how old this is, and Clive might have got the idea from Joe. But in terms of us,
of late, it's been pushed by Shane Condon and the Iron Boomerang project. They're actually done a lot of surveying that. But I will ask you for a comment.
The other day.
Yeah, I'll just ask you for a comment on this. Iron Boomerang's been around for some time. It's been pushed presented to both parties, been taken down to Canberra, and what they've been trying to get is a major project status. Now, what that does, that basically accelerates the process and also gets a lot of red tape out the way, and allows them to get on with the job. Mm-hmm. Now, they've been trying to secure that for a number of years, about 3 years that I know of. Now, here's the rub. I want you to have a comment on this comparison. In West Australia, there was an idea, a thought bubble, to create a hydrogen hub called Murchison Hydrogen. And even before it actually had any money on it, or anything more than a concept, the Commonwealth government gave it major project status. Mm. Yet it had no investors lined up. It was nothing more like. Can you give your opinion of that sort of attitude for one project and versus another project?
Oh, I can.
Keep it short.
Look, it's another boondoggle. The US Navy tried very, very hard to harness hydrogen as a fuel, and it gave up. It failed. It's a highly elusive molecule. It'll get through just about anything. It is the Houdini of molecules. And on top of that, it's got very broad flammability limits. It's a highly explosive gas when it leaks, and it will. It's another set of solar panels and windmills designed to cripple our productivity, waste megabucks, and not actually advance us whatsoever. Now, we're actually the party that understands that CO2 does not control temperature, as evidenced by the hard fact that sea levels at Fort Denison in February 2022, when the last measurement was published, are now 10 centimetres lower than they were when the first measurement was published in May 1914 on the BOM's record. There are other records that go back further. So CO2 does not control climate.
But don't stay there too long. The bomb will get onto that and homogenise it and adjust it.
Yep, I know. As they do everything.
Okay, if we can move on now just to your own electorates. Peter, I'll put this one to you. There's a lot of talk in Kennedy region and sort of Townsville, Charters Towers, all that, and water's a big issue. So we've got a couple of projects that has been sort of pushed along, and one that's recently got a tick is Hell's Gate. Do you support that sort of carte blanche, or do you want a bit of an evaluation and determination of something more practical, or
Bill,
look at all sorts of options?
Literally been studied to death, this one. The Townsville Enterprise Limited has been working on it for a very long time, and they're not the first to go through it. I noticed that my son-in-law came out recently and announced a funding commitment to it of 5.4 billion, which is variously reported as 5.6 billion. Bob Catter came out and said that he didn't like it. It didn't meet his specifications. He specifically quoted figures that the crest of this proposal would be 320 metres above sea level, whereas he wanted 390 metres above sea level. But when you drill down to the data, what little publicly available data there is, you find that the riverbed at the dam site is actually 326 metres above sea level. So Bob, again, is, I think, picking figures out of thin air. But the Townsville Enterprise people, I spoke to the project manager at length, have described Bob's proposal as utterly unaffordable. It would require a 40-kilometre long dam wall. And the fact that the federal government has seen fit to stump up 5.4 billion for Hell's Gate and irrigate 60,000 hectares of quite fertile land that just needs regular water is a boon. We are literally feeding 3 times our own population here. And with the World Economic Forum working so hard to crash supply chains and restrict fertilizers to farmers in the US and other countries, we could stand to make quite a bit of money down the track by being the cleanest and greenest farming country in the world, the least polluted, the best environmental managers. It's win-win-win all the way around. There's nothing not to like about that proposal.
The other thing is, I mean, you obviously like that proposal, but you need to also go back and look at the Burdekin Dam too.
Burdekin's good as well.
The Burdekin Dam, if that was built to the original stage 2, put an extra 14.6 metres on the wall, it would hold 5 times what Hell's Gate's got to do. And Hell's Gate's water is just the upper reaches of the Burdekin. It would come down to the Burdekin Falls Dam. Have 5 times as much ponding. It's shovel ready. 1.5 to $2 billion, and plus you get about a gigawatt of hydropower out of it. And with the money change you got over, that will buy an awful lot of pipes and pumps to distribute that water. I don't know.
If we stop wasting so much money, we could have both, mate. And once Hell's Gate is full, it's just another bump on the riverbed on the way down to the Burdekin. And we get plenty of wet seasons. In fact, we're heading into a wetter period over the next few years because of the solar cycles, which BOM and NASA don't really want to talk about because it destroys their climate narrative. But there's going to be plenty of water on the Australian East Coast, and the main thing is to have as many catchments for it as we possibly can. With the good economic management of the UAP and the massive reduction in squandering that the traditional duopoly have been going on with, we can easily afford both. And in fact, they would return massively on those investments. And in fact, we should have been doing this for the last 60 years and not fiddling around doing these small scale things, and Cairns, for example, is completely unable to build a twin to copper lode because we signed over the control of our bush in the hills there to another UN organisation, UNESCO. And quite frankly, to my mind, we need to exit the UN as rapidly as possible. It's completely outlived its usefulness. It's been subverted by communists. It doesn't benefit us in any way.
Okay, then. The other thing I'll just point out there, water is a state's responsibility. Bugger off.
All the money comes from the federal, mate, until we can get the taxpayers back into the state.
The money comes from the federal, but the water's state responsibility. Again, state governments are lazy. In your electorate, Dan, just touching on another area, projects that are wanted but never going to be delivered, and also is slightly outside the realm of the Fed's responsibility. But the growth of your region is critically important. You want economic development, you want prosperity, you want jobs and opportunities for future generations. Well, getting over the Kuranda Range in a timely manner and efficient manner would probably be a big help to the Cape and far north Queensland's economy. Now, again, it's really a state matter, but it's something that's always going to have to attract Commonwealth funding to get it. Do you think this is a conversation part for this term, or maybe just leave that one alone, or is there something else you want to concentrate on?
So you're referring to the opportunity to put a tunnel in, is that correct, Bob?
Not necessarily a tunnel. I want an efficient carriageway that can take large vehicles and have no restrictions on the type of load or the size of the load crossing the range. My general position on a tunnel will restrict the size of the load and what you can carry over up the range. Mm-hmm. So I think there probably needs to be a sort of, before you actually decide what you're going to do, maybe someone ought to look at the exact criteria that you're trying to meet. Yes. And make sure the road meets that. But I don't believe a tunnel can meet the requirements of moving large loads, dangerous goods loads, and then as the saber rattling with China, we might need to move military convoys with ordnance and stuff like that up that road. So I don't think tunnels are really a good idea for that sort of stuff. But that's just the conversation. Basically, we want to what Toowoomba got. They got a connector road, and we want a Cairns, Tablelands, Cape connector.
I think you hit a really, really vital point with any of these things is you need to establish the criteria to begin with, and you need to do that well, because we don't have a lack of resources or innovation in this country. We have a lack of clearly thought out plans. And, you mentioned there with the dams, making sure you answer those questions at the beginning before you go and build something. And if we had have just thought ahead, when you're going to all the trouble to build a dam or build a road in the first place, you do the surveys, you bring the contractors out to actually make it a bit wider, to take out a few more lumps, to, tunnel through a section, whatever it might be. A lot cheaper to do it when you actually bring everything there to build it, rather than having to come back and extend it later. So I think there's important things to consider. And also another point that you both made about overspending. We see the government, waste a lot of money here, there, and everywhere on different things. When I look at Cairns as a region, obviously Leichhardt's a hell of a lot bigger than Cairns, but the ability to access the Cape is a really important aspect. And I feel like the infrastructure of the roads, particularly to get from here to Weipa, need to be a hell of a lot better. I would love to see a way to get from Cairns to the Tablelands that was safer to start with. A hell of a lot less maintenance. The Kuranda Range is just not designed for heavy vehicles. I mean, they use it for heavy vehicles, but the trucks run up and down there all the time. We have regular accidents. There's a fatality there recently. I think there's been 3 trucks over this year. And what are we in April? So it's not a great use of infrastructure for that. It's a tourist road and a locals commuting road. It's not an industrial road. So, for years I've looked at the opportunities of what could come of different access ways. Obviously the Palmerston's pretty straightforward, but the problem is you have to drive all the way down to Innisfail to head back up. If you head north, if they would open up Old Quades Road, which in itself is a fantastic road, but you have to go through all the northern beaches and start heading past Alice Beach and go through all the windy coast road there. So neither of them are really great options because you have to drive a long way out of your way just to get up there. I'm not a cartographer. I've never surveyed the area, so I don't really know where it'd go, but it seems like an obvious future solution to have something like that because we don't want to keep developing our coastal area. That's where the rain comes. That's where the fertile soil is. We need to make sure we keep that to grow, fruit, vegetables and stuff like that, and have people live in areas that are a little bit more arid. You won't have the same kind of garden, but you don't have to, take up all the good agricultural land. And if people want good weather, the tablelands up here is incredible. I was just up there yesterday driving some friends around, and we got out of the car and it was about 5 or 10 degrees cooler than Cairns. So it's magic living. But anyway, that's another subject. You're in Tolga, aren't you, Peter? It's bloody beautiful.
I am, yes.
So look, infrastructure-wise, I don't know that would be in the first term. I think the planning would have to start, because if we don't start looking at that very soon, we probably should have started looking at it a lot longer, seriously. There's always jokes in the paper on 1st of April about, putting a tunnel and stuff like that. But I don't know. Bill, if you had an answer for it, what would it be?
Well, my answer to the people who want to put input in, like the advanced Cairns, the council, all the people in the economy, they need to get together and write the statement of requirements and the critical criteria. And that's the first point. And the thing is, if you come up with any idea that sort of reduces the capability that you want, well, then it's a no-go. So, I mean, they haven't basically even done that. And yet we've had a plethora of ideas. I think we've had about six in I suppose this year, there would have been about 6 different scenarios put into the Cairns Post. So I think there's obviously, and a lot of them are different. And I think that stems from the fact that there's no leadership here in regards to setting those criteria and making sure they're the things that are met by every proposal, and don't bother putting a proposal if they don't meet that criteria. If we can move on now and look at something that the federal government is responsible for, our lovely Great Barrier Reef.
Oh, I think you're going to defence, Bill.
I'll leave the defence off for a second, but I'm talking about what's specifically in your for Leichhardt. You've got a good portion of the Great Barrier Reef running from the Cape down to just off the Green Island and things like that. Peter, you've got a little section there going from a bit further south down towards Townsville. So it lies both in both of yours jurisdiction, and it's a favourite bashing point for the other parties. How are you going to play the straight bat for, let's say, the endangered Great Barrier Reef, and let's pile another couple of $1 billion into it?
Bill, do you want to know what the single greatest bleaching threat is to the Great Barrier Reef at the moment? It's the cooling solar cycle and falling sea levels. So none of the things that we've been told about the reef are true. Terrestrial sediment does not get to the reef itself. It gets to the inner onshore reefs, but it always has. If terrestrial sediment reached the reef proper, would the sand be white? Ask yourself that. Would the sand be white, or would it be yellow like sand everywhere else that's close to river mouths? The fact is that the prevailing winds and currents, as Professor Ridd has clearly stated, now he is the preeminent marine sedimentologist for the Great Barrier Reef, whether the JCU likes him or not, bearing in mind that his action to get some honesty into reef science was anathema to JCU's funding sources. Look, we are squandering so much of our wealth on a non-problem. Bleaching is coral's evolutionary superpower. There is literally no other species on Earth that can adapt to changes in its circumstances as quickly as coral can. If the water is for some reason suddenly fresher, it will expel its symbionts and take on symbionts that can cope with that fresher water. If it's hotter, then they will expel the symbionts, which is what bleaching is, and they will take on symbionts that are more appropriate. And yes, they do die from time to time. Otherwise, you wouldn't have all that fabulous white sand out there, which is just basically old dead corals that have been pounded by the waves. In fact, if you wanted to really reduce bleaching in the time of falling sea levels, hold on to your socks here, Bill. You'd need to dynamite channels into some of these lagoons to allow a quicker exchange of water. Yep, they don't want to talk about that, mate. Same as they run around killing the crown of thorns starfish, a native species, which just happens to be black and spiky, so they don't like it. But it's completely false science, mate. The crown of thorns starfish, the old Torres Strait Island fishers will tell you straight up, that's the Great Barrier Reef's gardener, mate. So a lot of the problems that we're seeing on the reef are a consequence of human interference by these self-ascribed experts that have really only been studying the reef for, well, since 1974. And, you know, the reef itself during the last ice age was actually 30 to 60 kilometres further east, clinging to the edge of the continental shelf. During the Holocene era warming and the Holocene sea level rises, the coastal plain was flooded, the sea moved inland, the reef followed it. So people say, oh, look, the reef's millions of years old. No, the species are millions of years old. The reef itself is no more than 10,000 years old, because 10,000 years ago, it was a savanna grassland and light open bush, because Australia was in an ice age. And we had land bridges to New Guinea and to Tasmania. So, yeah, meltwater pulse 1A was the first big sea level rise, and the seas rose, I think it was about a foot every 50 years or so, which was quite rapid. And yeah, so there is, the reef has become to the southern hemisphere what the polar bears are to the northern hemisphere. You know, when Al Gore was born, there was only 10,000 polar bears, and now that Al Gore's in his 70s, there's something like 80,000 of them, but they still run around with their hair on fire screaming about the polar bears. No, polar bears are doing fine. The reef is doing fine. What we need to do is inject some reality into some of these discussions.
Okay, then. That's been covered enough, I think, Dan. So I'll let you move on to defence.
sorry, Dan.
No, well, we don't have to repeat the same sort of thing. But yeah, defence. I mean, now it's come more sharply into focus in the last 5 years with the advance of China in the Spratly Islands near Japan, building air bases, you know, building air bases or building islands and then putting air bases on them. And then now most recently, their interest in moving into our Pacific region in regards to, especially now with the Solomons and that, and the talk of a belts and roads with them and a defence agreement. And of course, we also have the highlight now of an actual major conflict in Europe. So they definitely need to get some more focus on defence, both money-wise, equipment-wise, and personnel-wise.
Yeah, look, I think no matter how much of a pacifist people are and how much they want to avoid conflict, you need to be a realist about these things. And the reality is, if you don't have a defence force, you're weak and you're easy pluckings. And every country needs to have a defence force. I studied martial arts for years. I know Peter did as well. The thing is of training martial arts is you can walk around with your head up and not be that concerned, and also be able to walk away from a fight and be able to hold yourself in conversations and all those kind of things. A defence force is similar as an analogy. I think the conversation around the subs, I wouldn't go buying subs. And I think the UAP idea of leasing subs from the United States is very smart. You get trained, they've got ports in Hawaii they can be stationed at. We don't have to own it, and they can run out their life, and we don't have to spend that kind of money on the infrastructure to start with. And then, we're in a very fast moving time, and it's not going to be long before subs are just drones. They're already building them. It's going to happen in the next 10 years or so. I'd say the majority of submarines are going to be unmanned. There's not going to be the loss of life if there's a war. those kind of things. So I think spending the money that government was looking at doing with the French subs was a bad idea. I mean, they've stuffed that up, and there's something like $5.5 billion is going to be lost because they pulled out of the deal.
I think that was simply a political thing to save Pine's seat 2 elections ago. It was not a good military type decision. It was a political decision based on keeping South Australia's defence industry going and keeping Pine in his seat, which is a bad way to make a decision on defence hardware.
Stupid. Just call it what it is. It's just stupid. And it's not, that's another example of my frustration with politicians and bureaucracy. You don't throw around the public's money to save a seat and make election promises. That's just stupidity. I get very frustrated with those kind of things. So, but at the end of the day, coming back to the reality of all this, we need to have a defence force. The second great thing about having a defence force is you have this national training system where you can put people through training. If they're unemployed, go to the Defence Force. I'd love to see a gap year or two come in, so when people finish high school, they can go and get some skills. Not war, don't have to go and fight, but go and get skills, do a trade, go do some engineering, do something that adds value to the community and build that national identity of being Australian. You know, the Defence Force is so much more than just blowing stuff up and going to war. It's part of our culture. And if you look back, one of the things I love, as sad as it is, the stories about the Australian men and women who fought for the country. And I know it's a different time now, but the thing is that's like the story of the Anzacs, which is coming up very soon, is something that we all hold as Australians very dear to our hearts, very proud of, that people were willing to stand up and fight for our freedoms. And the idea that we've become so woke and so about the individual, we forget about the collective culture that is Australians. And that's a really important thing. And I know I'm kind of getting off topic on the defence subject and the investment of it, but the investment really should be around the people as well, making sure we have good people in there, because without good personnel, it's almost useless as well. And you don't attract people to any company or organisation unless the culture is good and the culture is strong. And there's a mutual win-win, right? So if we're talking about a company, people aren't going to want to work at a company, even if it pays well, if the culture is terrible. And we need to have the same thing in our military. We need to have a really good, strong culture that attracts people into it. They know that they're going to be doing something that benefits the country, and they're also going to get something really good for themselves.
I think one of the big things that's interesting is if you go back to when I was in the Defence Forces, I joined as a 15-year-old in the apprentice scheme.
Yep.
The Defence Forces, Army, Navy and Air Force would have trained something like probably 500 or 600 each apprentices each year in a number of different categories, from electronics to electrical to diesel fitters to car auto mechanics, and we even had construction units. There was Air Force had the airfield construction unit, the Army had a construction unit, and basically they had all the trades, and people could enlist, and they could actually get it as adults, not the apprentice scheme. They could go there and they could get trade training and actual experience. And unfortunately, it wasn't until later. It was probably not until the 70s that they started to give civilian recognition to these service people straight up. And I think that was a big problem for service persons that actually had this training, but then to get the equivalent civilian tickets, it became another hoop. You could get it, but you had to go through these hoops, whereas really they should have left the Air Force or the Army or that with that ticket and go straight into employment. But I don't think any service person should leave the Defence Forces without either some sort of trade qualification, professional qualification, or some particular license, like a rigger's license, a heavy vehicle license, a forklift license, and all those things. So we don't have that sort of, people leave the Defence Force and a bit of a loss. I mean, that's just, to me, that's just a natural. And the thing is, we're also got the Liberal Party pushing this, they already funded, but paying for half the apprentices' wages. Well, Australia's not really getting much out of that. We don't know what the employer's treatment of and skill base for those people are. But if we're already paying all those wages out, well, why not invest it into
You're speaking my language, Bill.
Re-establishing the apprenticeship system in the Defence Force?
I couldn't agree more. That's exactly my point. It seems like another great example of wasted money.
Okay, look, as we've gone the hour, we just want to wind it up. So if we could just stick to the things in your particular electorate that you want to focus on, and also the challenges that you'll have, because you're the sort of small boys on the block and the big boys are going to come out and point fingers at you, say you're not doing this properly and that. So what's the things you will be sort of taking to your constituents, and how do you think you'll fare against the basically badgering of the other parties?
Go on, Peter, you go first.
Well, in terms of local projects, Bill, without covering too much of the old ground, as you know, I've been campaigning on the range crossing issue since 1999. And I actually have a proposal that's fairly well fleshed out, and I've done the costings on it some years ago, so they're a little bit out of date, but they'd still be roughly correct. That actually pays for itself. So it's a combination of a number of infrastructure projects taking place simultaneously. It does involve a tunnel. However, the loads that can't go through a tunnel are actually quite a very small minority of the total loads that would be using the tunnel. So, and if you're talking specifically about fuel, then if we really didn't want to go up to Palmerston with a B-double, then we could indeed run a pipeline through. And same, we could have a pipeline for water coming down and alleviate some of Kansas problems. But it's a tunnel. It's the spoil is used to reclaim 4 square kilometres of East Trinity. The inlet is dredged properly to 15 metres, and that spoil fills those bunds that are created with the first half of the tunnel spoil. Second half of the tunnel spoil caps that land. That 4 square kilometres of land is sold. It pays for the dredging. It pays for the tunnels. It pays for bridges to connect it across. The tunnel comes out at Ray Jones Drive at the corner of Links Drive. It connects to the Kennedy Highway just near Davies Creek turnoff. It cuts the travel time. It brings the Cape communities, the Tablelands communities, and the Gulf communities closer to Cairns. And it's weatherproof, and it's a tsunami evacuation route for the low-lying suburbs of Cairns. And the Cairns Post used to print me quite regularly on that subject, but they don't anymore because I tried to tell the truth about COVID, and subsequently got banned right across the News Corp platforms. All 17 of them that I used to be published in. In fact, I was banned from for endeavouring to speak the truth. And yeah, so that would be one of my local issues. As to how to deal with the bullying from the major parties, mate, there's a lot more public dirt out there on them than there is on us. And you know, sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Not that I particularly want to engage in a mudslinging competition, but you know, it is what it is in politics, and I'm sure they'll be able to pick on something. I had pimples as a kid or something like that. I don't know, and frankly, I don't care. The major player in this election is Bob Katter, who will be 77 just after the election, who would appear to be in some sort of mental decline, who's been a representative in the federal sphere for Kennedy for 29 years, and for the same district roughly, or parts of the same district at least in the state sphere before that for another 17 years. And I don't know, has Mount Isa gone forward in that time? Has Charters Towers? Has Mareeba? Has Atherton? I'm not sure that any of these towns have done as particularly well. And the UAP, as a UAP candidate, and if we actually got the enough seats to form government or have a very big balance of power, then we can do things that one or two isolated candidates, such as a Katter and a Katter associate, we could do much bigger things than they possibly can. So, yeah, and Labor and Liberal, I think after the last 2 years, are just so on the nose with their abuses of our basic human rights. I mean, Australia was one of the half a dozen countries that got together to formulate the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It has 30 clauses. Our state and federal governments have been in breach of 18 of them. Over to you, Dan.
Well done, Peter. So, Bill, look, as I said at the beginning, I'm new to this game, but what I'm not new to is working with people. I love working with people. I've always loved working with people. And I'm not here to sledge the other candidates. If they want to start throwing stuff at me, then go at it. What are they going to do? Call me bald? I'm not. I'm not really concerned about any of that kind of stuff. It's a funny game. I was at the beaches the other day, and my mum was wearing a UAP shirt, and my mum's extremely proud. And some guy called her a moron, and I pulled him up and said, "Hey, mate, look, you can hate the party, you can have opinions of me, all that kind of stuff, but speaking to a woman like that, that's just not okay." So, there's certain things that will annoy me, but for the vast majority, I just let it slide. And I didn't get in a fight or an argument with a guy. I just reminded him that that's just not how you treat people. And he kind of just denied it. And then, off we went. So look, I'm not worried about the mudslinging. If they want to duke it out, then they've picked the wrong person. So,
I think I was more putting out in regards to the policies that they'll bring out and say, well, you're completely against the reef or something like that. So it's how to respond to their policies and their bashing of your position as policies, not as individuals.
Yeah, well, it's pretty easy actually, because most of their policies are just made up for votes rather than actually having some substantial thought process behind it. I was talking to another candidate the other day, and she said she knows that climate change is real because there's less animals at Holloway's Beach now than what there was as a kid. And I just thought, that's where you lose me. If someone wants to talk about environmental harm and pollution, no one can argue the point that we as humans are polluting the earth. Now you can, if you don't see it in your own backyard, then go to a city, go to Asia. You will see the rivers, the land, the air is totally polluted. No one argues that, right? And it would be silly for us to think that that doesn't do harm along the path, particularly the air pollution. It's terrible, and it vastly reduces your quality of life and your total life expectancy if you live in those cities. People get caught the knickers in a knot about climate change, and when I ask them what it is, no one can give me a direct answer. So for me, it's all about pragmatic. You need to figure out what it is, the objective you're trying to achieve, as you stated earlier. That's just smart thinking. No one goes and builds a bridge without understanding what the needs and requirements are from the private sector. Public, maybe. They do make lots of mistakes. But the thing is, for me, I love this area. I was born in Cairns. I was raised in Cairns. My mum was born in Moshman. My grandmother was born up in Herbert and raised at Daintree. My great-grandmother's from Thursday Island. I've got a lot of family up here. That's just interweaving between my mum and my mum's mum and mum's dad's side. This part of my DNA, this place, I love it. And when I think about what could be done differently up here, it's exciting, to be honest. One of the key things I'd love to see shift is, I know for a fact that ergon, when you look at remote communities, for every dollar that the people in the community spend on electricity, it costs us $10 to supply them with electricity through diesel generators. There's a lot of ways we could actually circumvent those costs and set it up so we wouldn't have to spend so much money on diesel. And that money that was once spent on ergon, having to go out and service diesel generators and supply the fuel, could be used to build up the community with other things like building better roads. There's some simple stuff out there that if this was a private business and you went into and looked at, you just go, wow, we can improve it in so many areas. But I think the problem is that politicians and bureaucrats don't look at it like a business, don't look at it in terms of how do we get the most value for a dollar. They look at it how we can win votes and how we can just spend money and keep people employed in the government. And that to me is just insanity. It's not about that. It's about delivering the best possible results for the taxpayer. And that's what I'm here to do.
I think the other thing to realise too is in regards to the environment, it's only when you're wealthy and you're a wealthy country can you actually afford to fix it. I mean, Western countries, if you go back into the 50s, yes, we used to have a lot of smog and all that sort of thing, but we've fixed it. Our air is not a real issue. Our air quality is not really an issue. In third world countries, it's a problem. And the thing is, they haven't got the money to fix the problem. And it's very important that we stay wealthy so we can continue to manage the environment.
Yes.
With good spending, and also from that, produce technologies that can be implemented cheaply in other countries that need a bit of help. So I think it's no good winding our ability to create wealth back if to fix the environment or climate change or whatever, because it's counterproductive. If you're going to reduce wealth creation, you're not going to get the deliverables.
Bill, you are so on the spot there, on the money, and it's something that I kind of jump up and down about, because I want to explain to people that if you look at Australia and our emissions, yeah, I get that we produce emissions, yet if you look at, you know, India and China and the US, it's a pittance, and people go, oh, well, per capita. I get that, but we also have a huge country where people drive long distances. So there's lots we can do to start mitigating that. But the reality is the low-hanging fruit is these developing nations and ways that we can help them reduce their pollution and just their general waste. You know, waste to energy projects is one of the things I work on. And, you know, you don't have to go far. Look at South America, Asia, they fill the rivers full of rubbish, and then the snow melts or the floods come and it just all piles out into the ocean. It's got nothing to do with climate change, but it's terrible for the environment.
Okay, gentlemen, we've done an hour and a bit. I'd like to thank you. Just final last comments and maybe wishing healthy recovery to Clive after falling off the stage.
I'll go. But look, I was chatting to Clive on Saturday night. He's fine, mate. He's dinged his head, but he was on fire. He was telling jokes and singing songs, and we're having a bit of a blast. And it takes a fair bit to keep that guy down. So final words for me: think smart, think intelligently about your vote. There's a lot of great candidates out there, and make sure you spend the time to figure out what it is you want out of a leader, rather than just going with some level of low certainty over a major party. And I don't think too many people who are going to vote for major parties are probably watching this. But this is your vote. It matters. So make sure you put it in the right place.
I think the important thing there is too that people need to realise with our preferential system, you never waste your vote.
No.
So it's very important to sit down and nut it out before you go to the ballot box, work out how you're going to do your preference. It doesn't have to be as per the party says. It's how you want your vote to flow. And for goodness sake, fill in all the boxes, please, people, because I did scrutineering on the last federal election. There was only 1,200 votes at the Balaclava school because we had 3 weeks of pre-polling, which I think is far too long. But of those 1,200 odd votes, there was 106 informals, because mostly because people didn't fill in every box. So there's something you can take to Mr. Palmer. As with all his spending money on advertising, please spend a few dollars on educating people in regards to don't waste your vote, fill the card out properly.
Yep.
Okay, Peter?
I think it's about 6,500 votes a year in Leichhardt that go in the bin.
Okay, Pete?
I'd just like to add that a lot of people believe that their vote will end up with one of the two major parties, but this is not true. And Bob Catter, in fact, is living proof of that. It's a matter, if we don't want a repeat of the last 2 years, what we need to think seriously about is putting the majors last. So most UAP how to vote cards, when they come out, will probably put the LNP, the ALP and the Greens as the last 3 preferences. And we will seek to exchange our first preferences with the most freedom-loving parties. Now, if enough people do the same thing, we're not going to get another ALP or LNP result. We'll get a UAP or another party result. And when it comes down to the so-called minors, even though we have more members than other parties in this country, we know who our Prime Minister would be. It'll be Craig Kelly. But Pauline can't be the Prime Minister from the Senate. So if One Nation happened to get enough votes to form government, who would be their Prime Minister? I don't recognise any of their candidates' names, whereas a lot of our people are fairly well known. So I don't know. I would certainly, if there does end up being a One Nation candidate in Kennedy, that would be the person that I would give my second preference vote to. But you know, if I wasn't a candidate here, I would be voting for the UAP in first, One Nation second, and other freedom-loving parties, and then any independents, and then LNP, ALP, and Greens last. And I think if we had a majority of Australians did that, we could actually break out of this nasty, tyrannical totalitarianism that we've seen, and get our freedom, get our rights back.
I think the other thing is what you're correct, Peter, in regards to minor parties can get in, and it's basically come about because the major parties are polling so poorly in their primary votes. In a sort of a seat where you normally get, say, the LNP candidate, historically, well, they might have got 48, 49% primary vote, and the Labor probably got 25. Now that has shifted a fair bit, where the usually incumbent party has dropped down into the high 30s, low 30s, and the other parties drop down into 20s. So the actual flow down from, if it's disciplined, the flow down of the minor parties can get one of those minor parties into that second position. Well, then the whole point is one of those major parties has to hand over their preferences to that minor party and give them the win. And that was a prime example of that was in Hinchinbrook in 2017. Nick DeMetto only polled 20-point-something% of the vote, but he got into that second position because the LNP incumbent was so on the nose, he only got 18%. The flow down from Labor, the LNP's preferences had to flow to Nick DeMetto eventually, and he surpassed the ALP and won the seat on the 20.1 primary vote. So that's the key out there. It's always possible now with our preferential system that minor parties can get it if everyone fills in their ballot paper correctly and gets their flow down to their desired requirements.
Absolutely.
Okay, gentlemen, I think we've done very well tonight. That half an hour has gone to an hour and a quarter. But I hope you enjoyed tonight. I have this is a pre-recorded. We'll probably post it up about Thursday, so you can I'll send you the links to the YouTube channel and to the Facebook, and then you can share it on from there. And of course, this Meet the Candidates election 2022 is open to all parties and all candidates in the regions. So I've approached other candidates from other parties, and hopefully they will come on board and have their opportunity to speak too.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, gentlemen, thanks very much.
Cheers, mate.
See ya.
Night, gentlemen.
Good night.
Good night.